to the International Red Cross are being shown round its museum in Geneva. They'll be told about all the things of which the Red Cross is justifiably proud. But the museum gives no clue to the dark secret at the heart of the world's oldest humanitarian organization, a secret which is only now being exposed.
Documents dating from the Second World War tell a story which shames the International Red Cross to this day. They reveal that although the ICRC was given secret information about Hitler's plan for the systematic genocide of the Jews, it chose to tell the world nothing. The International Committee of the Red Cross is accused of abandoning the Jews at the height of the Holocaust.
If you hear the Red Cross is coming, you hope, exaggeratedly possibly, that they'll do something. They'll give you food parcels, they'll prevent further transportations, they'll do something. In the end, they didn't.
They were a part of the international lack of interest in us. They went through the motions, they went for a visit, they came back, they wrote a report, they forgot about us.
Switzerland, a haven of neutrality in the maelstrom of Europe, is the home of the International Red Cross. From his village in the Swiss mountains, the Red Cross sent Maurice Rossel, then only 25, to Berlin for most of the last war. He's a witness to the institution's terrible failure during that period. Nowadays, he's a virtual recluse, surrounded by mementos, which he says symbolize the world's expectations of the International Red Cross. But in practice, he says, it has very little authority.
Vous m'avez posé la question, quels sont les moyens du CICR et qu'avez-vous comme autorité et que faites-vous, qu'avez-vous fait dans votre travail? Eh bien, un brouillon, un bloc, un crayon, et mon autorité s'arrête là.
C'est tout.
C'est tout. Aucune autre possibilité.
For the first time in this war, a newsreel cameraman brings to the screen a fragment from the daily work of the International Red Cross in its errands of mercy for prisoners of war. From the holds of neutral ships come those life-saving crates of parcels and medical supplies bearing the comfortable symbol, the Red Cross on the white ground. The flag of Switzerland with colors reversed, which over 80 years ago became the banner of organized humanitarianism on the field of war.
This is the popular image of the Red Cross, helping the victims of war, whoever they may be. It's remembered with deep gratitude by millions of POWs from both sides in the Second World War.
Without the Red Cross parcel, thousands would have died. People like myself were down to about 6 and 7 stone.
These men know they owe their lives to the Red Cross. The survivors of several North of England regiments meet every year, and they remember their saviours.
News came through that we were going to receive a Red Cross parcel. And when we got them, our morale lifted sky high. You know, we thought, oh, this is not too bad, because we hadn't had any food at all. So we got these parcels, and it was a real Aladdin's cave. You know, there was about 12 inches by 10 by 5 deep. There's cream crackers, raisins, corned beef, spam, coffee or tea, sugar of course, and sardines.
But millions died in the concentration camps and ghettos, and the International Red Cross did nothing to help them. The survivors feel bitterly betrayed.
Looking back now, I must say I look at them with a certain contempt. The Swiss had freely travelled to Germany, through Germany, before the war, during the war, and you must be blind not to know what's going on, because concentration camps were dotted all over the place, and they were right past railway lines. I mean, our last one was just passed just on a railway line on one side and along a main road on the other. You couldn't miss it.
From its earliest days, the International Red Cross, discreet, neutral, was the fiefdom of Switzerland's wealthiest families, many of whom had strong ties to Germany. When Hitler came to power, these people didn't all think Nazism was so terrible.
Au CICR, il y avait quand même une certaine catégorie, je dis bien une certaine catégorie de gens assez haut placés qui étaient germanophiles. Et ils avaient une peur panique de Staline et des communistes. Finalement, Hitler était leur dernier rempart contre le communisme.
Many in Europe had felt the same until the war changed their minds. In Switzerland, there was no war, and for a nation which had grown rich from jewellery and watchmaking, banking and insurance, anything was preferable to communism.
Mais préférer l'Allemagne, c'est préférer les nazis.
Ah ben bien sûr, ce qui était le pire pour eux, c'était de penser que la Russie pourrait arriver à leurs frontières. Alors ça, c'était pour eux le cauchemar numéro 1.
This is Geneva by night. A neutral capital surrounded by warring nations, it radiates light in a dimmed Europe. Brilliantly illuminated shop fronts are for us the ghosts of 1939.
The war was a golden era in Switzerland. While the rest of Europe suffered depression and unemployment, neutral Switzerland, with money invested in German armaments, prospered.
We look down on one of the city's famous bridges which span the River Rhone. Were you to follow this route, it would bring you to the very heart and nerve center of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the focal point of worldwide Red Cross relief work in wartime.
The exclusively Swiss International Committee was high-minded, but one member had divided loyalties. Philippe Etter was also a Swiss government minister, eventually became president. He had a disproportionate influence on the committee.
The member of the Swiss government that at that time was a member of the ICRC. In my view, this was a great mistake of my predecessor to have this political influence allowed officially inside the committee.
Sa voix pesait de tout le poids que pouvait peser le gouvernement suisse. Il ne faut pas oublier tous les services que la Suisse rendait au CICR pendant la guerre, en mettant à disposition son service diplomatique. Plus de la moitié du financement du Comité international de la Croix-Rouge pendant la guerre a été payé par le gouvernement suisse.
Quand je l'ai dit dans une conférence internationale après la guerre, j'ai dit le CICR complètement indépendant du gouvernement suisse, l'Assemblée a éclaté de rire.
The other dominant figure on the committee was Karl Burckhardt, a forceful and wily character who presided over it for much of the war.
The president of the International Red Cross, Professor Karl Burckhardt, and Mr. James, chief of the American Red Cross in Geneva. Professor Burkhardt carries on the work and tradition of Henri Dunant, founder of the International Red Cross.
Like me, he was a German Swiss, which doesn't mean that we're German. He was also, because of his contacts with the German hierarchy at the time, having been High Commissioner of the League of Nations in Danzig, he had contacts to the leadership of the Nazi Party.
Au fond, Burkhardt, ce à quoi Burkhardt a rêvé, c'est à être un peacemaker entre les Anglais et les Américains d'un côté et les Allemands de l'autre, parce que, comme beaucoup des milieux dirigeants, notamment des notables allemands conservateurs, il redoutait par-dessus tout une victoire du communisme.
By 1935, the Nazi repression was growing more intense. They were rounding up those they wanted out of the way. That same year, Burkhardt inspected several German concentration camps, including the newly opened Dachau. His criticism of the treatment of inmates, political prisoners, homosexuals, Jews and gypsies was distinctly muted.
Et le but de cette visite a été effectivement un but politique. Il s'agissait de montrer que le CICR pouvait, et Burkhardt l'a bien fait comprendre aux dirigeants allemands, que le CICR devait être mis en état de pouvoir dire nous avons visité les camps et ils sont durs mais corrects.
The following year, Burkhardt returned to Germany for a second visit. His letters make extraordinary reading. He appeared to have fallen in love with the fantasy of National Socialism. His letter to Konstantin Heil, the Nazi Labour Minister, was fulsome in its praise.
The transformation of a great military tradition into productive educational aims seems to me one of the greatest, most promising achievements of our time.
When he came to write to Hitler, his warmth knew no bounds.
What especially and permanently impressed itself on me was the joyous spirit of cooperation that informed everything. It has opened a whole new vista and understanding for me.
The letter was signed,
"You're deeply devoted, deeply grateful, and deeply respectful, Karl Burkhardt."
It's one thing being deceived, another one don't mind being just deceived. You've got to use a certain intelligence. And they didn't display that. Or willingness, let's put it that way. Willingness to find the truth. And they didn't seem to be intent on that either.
But there were others on the committee who were frequently in opposition to the pro-German views of Karl Burkhardt, most notably the women.
I remember three. There was Madame Frick Kramer, there was Mademoiselle Suzanne Ferrier, and there was dear Lucie Audier. They had very definite opinions.
As the International Red Cross archives reveal, these women knew that people were disappearing all over Europe and were demanding that Burkhardt and the committee intervene.
Again and again, they begged the committee for help. They were getting letters from all over Europe demanding that there should be action taken on behalf of the Jews. The letters are still here in the ICRC archives.
My brother, Roger Kahn, was one of those deported. Can the Red Cross find any news about him and his state of health and help me to relieve his suffering? Sam Kahn, Limoges, France.
Just received disquieting news from letters and Jewish press that Jews, particularly old people, being deported from Czechoslovakia. Can you obtain any reliable news and inform us? We have a very great number of desperately anxious inquiries. Miss Warner, British Red Cross.
There were heartbreaking scenes in Budapest station. Pregnant women collapsed during the transportation. Children, separated from their parents, screamed and wept from fear and shock. Countess Dobransky, Hungary.
Is there any possibility that the International Committee can obtain information about the present whereabouts of those who have been deported? Prince Carl of Sweden, President of the Swedish Red Cross.
Cette persécution organisée va amener des milliers de Juifs à chercher refuge en Suisse, ce qui va amener le gouvernement fédéral à fermer la frontière. Donc la Suisse est en contact direct, pratiquement, avec la déportation.
But at this stage, scarcely anyone knew that Hitler's plans included the wholesale extermination of the Jews. One man who did was Gerhard Riegner of the World Jewish Congress. In 1942, he heard of a secret visit to Geneva by a German industrialist who'd risked his life in smuggling out the news of Hitler's plans for systematic genocide. Riegner begged the Allies for help, but with no success. In desperation, he turned to the International Red Cross.
The most terrible years of my life. Here, the beauty, the sunshine, the Mont Blanc, the lake, and from a few kilometers from here, the hell started. Thousands and millions of people were killed, and I couldn't help.
Karl Burkhardt was deaf to Riegner's story and pleas, but Jean Pictet, the committee's secretary, was horrified.
J'étais rongé de soucis quand je savais qu'il y avait des camps de la mort. Parce qu'avant, vous savez, on a mis longtemps avant de comprendre. Ça, je dois le dire en passant. On ne peut pas imaginer qu'une grande puissance qui avait donné des Goethe et des Beethoven, n'est-ce pas, des Bach, qu'une grande puissance pouvait exterminer une partie de sa population. On ne pouvait pas l'admettre. Il a fallu vraiment avoir des preuves. Et j'ai été voir le président du CICR, et M. Maxou, avec qui je travaillais de façon très proche, et je lui ai dit, je crois qu'il faudrait lancer un appel.
In October 1942, at the Hotel Metropole in Geneva, the committee was summoned to a special session to discuss the idea. Going public is the last resort for the International Red Cross, but before the meeting, all the members of the committee were sounded out to see if they'd be in favour of giving a warning about Hitler's plans. The great majority were. But the president of Switzerland, Philipp Etter, was fiercely opposed. He was terrified the Germans might retaliate and invade.
Mr. Etter, who was formerly a member of the International Committee, but never attended any meeting, participated at this meeting and clearly indicated the government didn't want such a protest.
And these are the minutes of this critical meeting on Wednesday, the 14th of October, 1942. And there's only one item on the agenda, which is, should they or should they not send out a general appeal to the belligerent countries in favour of human rights? Almost everybody there is in favour. One after the other, they speak about it. The first of the four women who are members of the committee, particularly strong. Madame Frick-Kramer says that the committee simply cannot keep silent in the face of the worsening of the methods of war and the extension of hostilities to the civil population. She says if they keep quiet, it could even risk the existence, the very existence of the committee, especially after the war. More people speak in favour, and yet more. The last two speakers are the most important people on it. Burkhardt himself, who says he doesn't think that sending out an appeal like this could be conceived of as a courageous act at all. He thinks it will simply upset the belligerent countries. And then comes the clincher, the last speech of all. It's made by Philipp Etter, who's not only the Minister of the Interior, but also at this time he was acting as President of Switzerland. So what he said came with all the force of the Swiss state. It's a really subtle and clever speech. He says, first of all, that he thinks that this whole initiative is a really noble inspiration, but he's just got one or two little hesitations about it. And then he puts the boot in. He says he thinks that it would be a lack of impartiality, which could have serious effects on the Red Cross. He says he thinks it could have a a very bad effect on the different belligerent countries, could damage their relations. And finally, he says, and this is the key thing, it could actually destroy all the practical hard work that the committee did. Well, that swung it. Everybody had been in favour before, but now it was different. Just before 5 o'clock, the President puts it to a vote. Which members wish to send a general appeal, he says. And it goes on, no member of the committee was in favour of this.
She walked left, and I was told to walk right. As a matter of fact, I didn't. The SS officer, obviously I don't know who it was, pointed with his finger left and right. And my mother, we got lost. That's to say, we were up in groups of 6, a long line of 6, two groups of 6, and we got separated. And she spied me, and she broke rank, she came to me and shook me by the hand and left. I then saw her go left, and I automatically followed her. You know, I was going to go, but and I was called back. I looked fit to work, and so I went right in the end. That was the last time I saw her. Except I didn't see her. And the first night, we were stripped and shaved and had these funny garments put on. And we had the first experience of it, and then we were told there were gas chambers, and what you see in the chimneys are when people are burned after they're gassed. And so I stood outside, and I saw the flicker of the flames. And all I remember saying to myself, which of these flames is my mother?
The committee maintained its silence. The only possibility of helping those in the concentration camps fell to a handful of individual Red Cross delegates.
J'ai pris une petite valise et je suis parti sur Bâle, pris l'express pour Berlin et je suis arrivé à la délégation à Berlin. Formation et instruction, néant. Néant. Tout simplement néant.
Maurice Rossel's official job was to inspect prisoner of war camps, like this one in occupied Poland, which were covered by the Geneva Conventions. But unlike many POWs, civilians were not protected, in spite of intense lobbying before the war by the International Red Cross.
Le Comité international de la Croix-Rouge n'avait aucun droit de regard, aucun droit de critique, aucun droit de transmettre une information concernant les camps d'internés civils, n'est-ce pas? Parce qu'il était lié par la Convention de Genève que les prisonniers de guerre.
There were ways the International Red Cross could have helped people other than POWs if it had wanted to. Was it hiding behind a legal shield?
I am convinced that my predecessors could have done more than what had been done in order to be more active, even in this field where there was no legal basis for them to act.
Mais à côté de ces bases légales d'intervention, le comité, dans ses statuts, a la possibilité de prendre toute initiative humanitaire qui se justifierait à ses yeux. Donc le comité avait non seulement la possibilité, mais le devoir, de son point de vue, d'intervenir pour les victimes, au fond, les moins protégées, les plus abandonnées de toutes les victimes de la guerre, c'est-à-dire les persécutés raciaux et politiques.
extrêmement difficile, hein, de mettre en péril une organisation, je vous l'ai déjà dit, une organisation qui manipule et qui est responsable de la vie de tant de centaines de mille, enfin c'est 6 millions d'hommes. Mettre ça dans une balance pour vouloir pousser un coup de gueule et dire des choses que tous les gouvernements savent.
In 1944, Rossel managed to get to Auschwitz, but he didn't get past the camp commander and he achieved nothing.
Alors là, ce n'est pas Genève qui a donné aucun ordre, c'est moi-même qui ai dit cette fois, je veux y aller. J'étais déjà allé à Ravensbrück aussi de mon propre chef, en faisant la noce pas mal de fois à Wiener Neustadt et à Vienne avec des officiers SS, en leur apportant les cadeaux dont j'ai parlé, n'est-ce pas, les cigarettes, surtout les bas de nylon qui étaient, avec des bas nylon, on faisait n'importe quoi.
Il aimait ça. Hein?
Ah, c'était le cadeau qu'ils faisaient à leur maîtresse, n'est-ce pas, alors c'était fabuleux, et puis une cartouche de Camel, et puis voilà, on obtenait un passage d'entrée, quoi, avec les estampilles nécessaires. Mais c'était toujours personnel, hein. C'était à moi et pas aux délégués du comité international de la Croix-Rouge, comprenez bien. Il ne voulait pas trop se compromettre.
Et impossible de lui poser la question qu'est-ce que s'est passé, qu'est-ce que se passe dans les bains, dans les douches du camp. Impossible.
Mais voyons, est-ce que vous voyez poser des questions à un type dont vous savez qu'il ne va pas vous répondre ou qui va se moquer de vous, hein? C'est la fin d'une conversation, d'accord? Ah oui. Alors vous me voyez, ah pardon mon commandant, puis alors dans votre salle de douche, vous en gazez combien de milliers par mois ou par semaine, hein? Vous voyez à peu près cette question, comme elle aurait été bien placée. Moi, il fallait que je rentre vivant de là, hein, faut encore pas oublier ça, ce qui n'était pas encore garanti.
If the International Red Cross was guilty of doing nothing, the German National Red Cross Society was completely taken over by the Nazis and had nothing to do with Geneva. Its new head was an exceptionally sadistic doctor. He appointed the doctors at Auschwitz, who selected which prisoners should be killed. It was his idea to use gas chambers for mass extermination. His name was Ernst Gravitz. His second-in-command in the German Red Cross was a surgeon, Karl Gebhardt. Together, they carried out hideous and painful medical experiments on women in the camps. After the war, at the Nuremberg trials, Gebhardt was one of 7 doctors identified and sentenced to death. Gravitz, his boss, had already committed suicide. From early in the war, the German Red Cross was already lying to Geneva and refusing to answer inquiries about the disappearance of the Jews. The International Red Cross should therefore have been deeply suspicious when in June 1944 it received an unexpected invitation from the German Red Cross and the SS to visit Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. Rossel was sent from his base in Berlin to the camp, which was later revealed as a fraud, a showcase for the world.
Le comité ne pouvait pas refuser cette invitation. Interdiction de parler seul avec un prisonnier. Se soumettre à la direction de la visite par les officiers SS.
Alisa Scheck and Alitza Schiller were taken to Theresienstadt when they were 15. Their entire families were wiped out. Today they live on an Israeli kibbutz, where they've created a tiny museum about the Nazis' show camp.
I came there with my family, with my mother, father and brother, and my grandmother, and Only, my grandmother and me stayed in Theresienstadt till the end. And the others were shipped to Auschwitz and perished, of course. We were at some point told that there is a commission coming, a commission of the International Red Cross, and that the town must look spick and span, and people started to plant, to sow a lawn on the big square, you know, where usually before the war, where the soldiers were exercising. It was a huge square. It had to be covered with lawn, and people had to scrub the streets and to paint the facades, the fronts of the houses where the commission went.
The Nazis transformed Theresienstadt, not just for the Red Cross, but to make this propaganda film. Since most of the inmates were starving and ill, it took the Nazis 8 months to make the film. And to avoid showing the reality of desperate overcrowding, they deported huge numbers to the death camps.
When the International Red Cross came, they shipped out about 18,000 people to make it a bit more livable, the whole thing. It was all very well staged, and obviously so well that the commission endorsed it as a reality, really. Nobody could approach them. Nobody could talk to them. So they were just served all this bluff, and they swallowed it.
Did the Red Cross fall for the charade? Russell's report at the time seemed to take Theresienstadt entirely at face value.
It was an unreal situation, incongruous, you know, that you have a ghetto with people apprehensive and fearful, and there you have a band playing lively tunes. It just didn't go, but it wasn't meant for us.
Et c'était effrayant. C'est là que j'ai dit, c'est un drame kafkaïen qu'il faut avoir vécu, n'est-ce pas? Être là dans une pièce de théâtre, où vous savez que vous êtes dans une pièce de théâtre, où on vous fait visiter une ville, où on vous fait entendre un orchestre, où on vous montre des gens qui sont habillés très correctement, qui ont la possibilité de salles de dessin pour les enfants, tout ça. C'est une comédie, et savoir qu'ils sont condamnés à mort.
Some people probably thought that the Red Cross will see through the whole bluff, but they were mistaken. They thought that it's so obviously staged that they must see through it, but I'm not so sure that they didn't see through it. I think I'm sure they didn't, because of the report we read afterwards. Yeah. But they say it's much better than they thought it was, and that the conditions are good. That they couldn't come sooner. That they didn't get the permission to come sooner in such a nice city. In such a nice town, where the Germans had nothing to hide. Yes, but I think there were political reasons too, not only that it's the lack of imagination of the Swiss.
Dans vos rapports après les visites, pourquoi vous n'avez pas tout expliqué?
Quand je faisais mon rapport, je savais que mon rapport allait partir par la voie diplomatique à Genève. Hein? Je savais que la Gestapo l'aurait dans les 24 heures. Hein? C'était tellement bourré d'espionnites partout et d'espionnage que mon rapport, je l'écrivais en sachant qu'il serait lu immédiatement par la Gestapo. à qui j'allais de nouveau redemander bientôt quelque chose, et puis que je ne voulais pas mettre non plus le CICR en difficulté. Et je vois encore le Obersturmbannführer avec qui je parlais. J'ai dit, j'ai mon rapport ici, je peux vous le lire si vous voulez. Il m'a dit, non merci, je l'ai. Il l'avait en main. Hein. C'est comme ça la guerre. C'est comme ça la guerre.
Et impossible d'aller à Genève et parler face à face.
Ça, c'était possible, mais c'était rare parce qu'il fallait y aller à Genève. Et puis le voyage de Genève était un voyage que j'ai fait seulement peut-être 2 fois. Hein, parce qu'une fois qu'on était là-bas, il fallait y rester. Hein, les voyages par chemin de fer, c'était pas du gâteau, je peux vous assurer. Toutes les gares bombardées.
When nothing happened, we were more disappointed. Moods swing from one extreme to the other. You hope for something, and if it doesn't materialize, you're more disappointed than if the hope had never been made.
Well, we hoped that at least the transport will stop because of the commission, because of the Red Cross, but they didn't, because the Red Cross was the end of June, and it's September and October. Almost 30,000 people were sent away, so they didn't even serve this purpose. That was clear. It was clear to us that the Commission had a good impression and then forgot about us. So the Germans could do what they like, and what they liked was to send all the people to Auschwitz.
In 1945, the Nazis were facing defeat. Orders came that everyone still alive in the camps should be killed before they could be liberated. At last, the Red Cross made a move. It calculated that if it could get its delegates into the camps, they might prevent this final slaughter.
Le président d'alors du CICR, M. Burkhardt, est allé pour voir Himmler. Il a été reçu par son adjoint qui l'a dit, eh bien, vos détenus, vos délégués peuvent entrer dans les camps de concentration, mais ils devront y rester jusqu'au bout de la guerre, jusqu'à la fin de la guerre. C'était une réponse assez monstrueuse, n'est-ce pas? Et nous avons trouvé les délégués qui ont accepté.
The only good thing about the Red Cross was that at the end of the war they somehow helped us to get through the end phases without being exterminated in the end, because the Germans made preparation for that. They built a gas chamber and they built a place where we should have been shot, and all those things were in preparation. And because I think because there was somebody from the International Red Cross in Theresienstadt all the time and made a deal with the Germans that they will let them go without interfering if they leave us alone to the end. So I don't know how we would have finished.
Eight Red Cross delegates managed to get into camps in the last months of the war. Many succeeded in their mission, preventing the massacre of tens of thousands of adults and children. Theirs emerge as individual acts of courage in the shadow of a weak and cowardly leadership.
Dans les circonstances, comme j'ai fait, je ne changerai rien. Je n'ai pas honte de certaines choses. Ouais, pouvoir dire, là j'ai fait telle erreur, ou comme ça. J'ai fait des erreurs, j'ai été incapable. Bien sûr, je ne suis qu'un médiocre.
People longed for the Red Cross to be the great international arbiter, the world's referee, stepping in to protect the weak and innocent. But leaving aside the individual acts of courage and the immensely valuable work for prisoners of war, the International Red Cross simply wasn't up to the job of looking after the people who most needed protection.
Le comité n'est rien fait apparemment. auprès des gouvernements alliés, auprès des gouvernements neutres, pour leur dire il se passe un drame épouvantable et vous devez faire quelque chose, vous ne pouvez pas vous contenter de l'argument victory first, il faut gagner la guerre pour sauver les Juifs. Et là, c'est là où je crois que le comité a manqué d'imagination.
Dans la nuit, peut-être, est-ce qu'il y a une voix dans votre cerveau qui dit « Et si j'ai dit au commandant à Auschwitz qu'il était horreur ?»
Oh, alors ça, non, ça ne m'a jamais venu, puis je ne le dirai pas, parce que ces gens-là étaient fiers de leur travail, ils étaient fiers de ce qu'ils faisaient, ils étaient convaincus d'être les purificateurs, n'est-ce pas? À Auschwitz, ils disaient c'est l'anus de l'Europe. Hein? Il faut vider il faut que l'Europe se nettoie, et c'est nous qui sommes responsables de cette purification. Mais ne croyez pas qu'ils étaient gênés ou que ça... Mais ils étaient fiers du travail qu'ils faisaient. Ah, ou bien vous essayez de mettre ça dans votre tête, ou bien vous n'avez rien compris. Vous n'avez rien compris au SS. Rien. Vous êtes un naïf. Un grand naïf. Mais ça vous passera, vous verrez. La naïveté, elle s'use vite.
On a reproché aussi de ne pas dire. Le CICR savait exactement la même chose que les États européens, les États belligérants, que les autres grandes institutions humanitaires, le pape, etc., savaient. Ni plus ni moins. Et nous n'avons pas fait ni plus ni moins que les autres. C'est tout. N'est-ce pas? Voilà.
It was a part of all that lack of interest, because if the Allies would have wanted, they could have bombarded the train lines to Auschwitz, and that would have finished the Auschwitz extermination. They didn't do it because it wasn't important strategically for them. And there were hundreds of planes coming over our heads every day of the year, and none of them bombarded those lines.
Amid the euphoria of liberation in 1945, the International Red Cross put a positive gloss on its efforts to help the victims of the Nazi persecutions. In that same year, it received the Nobel Peace Prize for its role in the war. Its failure to speak out was quietly forgotten. Horrified by the experience of the Second World War, the International Red Cross renewed its pressure on governments to extend the Geneva Conventions to cover civilians and the victims of persecution. In 1949, it finally succeeded. But only now, over 50 years later, has the International Red Cross begun to reassess its wartime role and face the past. The current president flies around the world to address Jewish communities. Today he's in London.
The ICRC didn't speak out as it saw persecution become extermination. I cannot judge now my predecessors of 1939, 1945, possible errors and omissions of the then ICRC leadership that I have regretted, certainly.
I mean, you say yourself there were errors and omissions. I mean, it was morally wrong to stay quiet, wasn't it? Just because it was more.
It was morally wrong not to have made a statement of this kind. But I think that if the statement would have been done, we would have had many persons today to say, why did you such a weak statement? I think that one has always to recall what is the ICRC. We are not here working for history. We are not here working for being a moral authority. We are an institution very concretely engage in favor of war victims. And we have to cope with what international law asks us to do.
The Red Cross also has to find a way to heal old wounds. It can only carry out its work where it has respect. In Jerusalem, at the museum dedicated to the Holocaust, an International Red Cross delegation has come to make amends.
This area here is dedicated to the final solution itself, to the death camps. And the distinction that I want to make, that this map makes, is, I think, a very important distinction. The map has three types of camps. The green spots are labor camps, which were intensely awful places where people were worked to death, and there was a high rate of attrition, meaning a lot of the people there, sometimes tens of percent, died. The yellow lights are the bigger concentration camps, but there's no major philosophical difference between the concentration camps and the labor camps.
With new openness, it's handing over copies of its entire archives on the Second World War for the scrutiny of Jewish historians. One reporter wants to know if the Red Cross is at last really owning up.
The traditional secrecy of the Red Cross was used as a kind of excuse to keep this material secret for so long.
The ICC admits, yes, that it has kept silence with regard to Holocaust, and that this is, I mean, I would say this is the heart of the moral failure.
The original stance in Warsaw.
Can a mere apology make reparation for failures as terrible as these?
What the Germans did was clearly much worse than what the Red Cross did. And the Germans are in a process, they're nowhere near finished, nor are we finished, but there is an ongoing process which is leading to an ability to respect each other's memories and to look back with honesty on what happened. I don't know if that's healing. I think that's an element of healing. If that's true between Jews and Germans, it's certainly possible of happening between the Red Cross and Jews. The Red Cross, no matter how you look at it, were not the chief villains in what was going on. Clearly, an essential element in that is they're coming clean and allowing anybody who wants to go and look and evaluate and express their interpretation of what they think they see there and not trying to hide it. Once that has happened, and it seems to be happening now, then the process can start. Previous to that, it couldn't even have started.
Nina Halperin, 7 years old, Poland. Yosef Vick, 11 years old, Poland.
Coming clean about the Holocaust will have profound consequences for the International Red Cross. The world expected it to stand up for good in the face of evil, and it chose not to. What choices will it make when confronting today's crimes against humanity?
Sarah Schulklapper, 11 years old, France. Etia Weber, 5 years old, Czechoslovakia. Elisabeth Rosenthal, 15 years old, Germany. Bracha Grüner, 8 years old, Poland. Moshe Aronson, 9 years old, Poland. Sigmund Springer, 8 years old, Austria. Julia Constantine, 2 years old, Italy. Freddy Confino, 14 years